Welcome. And I'm Anna Isabel. I'm an analytical hypnotherapist as well as a psychological astrologer. And today I am very excited to have with me what some might call a modern mystic, Michael Rhodes. Michael, thank you so much for speaking to us today.
My pleasure, Anna, my pleasure. I'm glad, happy to see what unfolds.
Well, I thought we would have a look at your charts today, because that's a really nice way for people to begin to get to know you. And of course, the very first thing that I was looking at was the fact that you're an Aries, which is not
the cream of humanity.
The cream of humanity, but not exactly known for its mystical connections. So tell me a little bit about you as an Aries, because Aries is a sign that's associated with being very assertive, sometimes aggressive, definitely impatient, very much a go-getting, competitive, energetic sign. And so how does that fit with you?
You can get two versions. If Carolyn was sitting here, my wife, you'd get one version, but with me sitting here, you get a better version. Looking back over my years, I think I definitely started as a typical Aries. I've never really had anger issues, but I have been aggressive at times. I was known to be aggressive, but it was more put on as a form of little boy defense, even as an adult, than the fact that I was aggressive. Here I was in my late 30s, and I wanted to, to me, I was like 12 years old. How did I get to be in my late 30s and in this situation? And so I used aggression and arrogance as a form of defense to keep people away, because I don't know about other areas, although the ones I know seem to have it, an ability for articulation. Is that an Aries trait, articulation?
No, it isn't, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. Because
I've always had, you see, it's an interesting thing. When I was a boy, my father, who was a Scorpio, and my brother, well, he's born in January, but he was 3 years older than me, and they would argue when they got it, and as they got older, and I was 3 years behind, and I'd listen to their arguments, and I would join in, and gradually, I learned articulation because they were both very articulate. And so, but they would get angry if they started to lose an argument, and I would keep cool. And so by the time I was in my teens, I could beat them, and they didn't like that. But anyway, so, and I feel as I've grown, especially since I got on my spiritual path, I've left some of the normal Aries characteristics behind. I have definitely some impatience. I don't like to stand in queues. I really don't like queues. But when I'm writing a book, and I've written 23, you're on your own and you have to be very patient. And I've got over 2 acres of garden, and I'm infinitely patient in the garden. Just recently, we had a mini storm, and it hit us very savagely. And 2 bonsai that I've grown for years were suddenly reduced to stumps. But I found, as I looked at them, like 40 years of growth gone. They're not dead, but I found that I was completely calm about it. Oh, well, this is nature. It is as it is. Whereas a typical Aries would have gone off storming away. So I'm no longer as fiery. The fire doesn't rise up so much now. I'm more balanced.
I think it's an interesting thing, because the lesson of astrology is that we grow into our sun sign. And I think that very often we have some of the traits of that sun sign when we're younger, but then we grow into it. And what I feel is that we discover all the different depths of the sign as we mature. And I think for Aries, you know, we talk about the traits as we've described them, but I think when Aries matures as a sign, it matures into leadership, and it matures into that competitive energy being used as a striving for a goal.
That's interesting, because the leadership thing has been pushed at me all my life, and I tried to avoid it for a long time. Like, I didn't want to be known as a spiritual teacher, but eventually I succumbed. So the leadership thing has been fairly strong in my life. But what was the last thing you said? I got hooked up on leadership.
A striving and a moving forward.
I've never competitive. I've never been competitive. From a child, I was non-competitive. They couldn't make me join a race. I'm very right brain, and so the point of competition is very left brain driven, and I just couldn't see the point of it. Who cared? You know, who cared if they could do it better than me? I couldn't care, and I've never been competitive. And this is what I like about writing as an author. We encourage others to write. We write lovely things for their books. We don't compete as authors, we encourage. And that's nice.
So the thing about competition, the purpose of competition is comparison. And comparison should be about learning. So an athlete should be watching their rivals to see what they could learn from them in order to improve and become good at what they're doing themselves.
Let me pick you up on this. As a spiritual teacher, you don't need comparison. You have no rivals. It's all one humanity, and you're moving everybody along. Okay, continue.
And the point is one of learning, because you learn from your experience. And what you're doing is you are watching how somebody else does something in order to learn from them. And
sure.
the element of competition comes more as a striving then to be the best that you could be. So that is the higher purpose of that competitive energy. And it seems to me that that is more akin to what you're describing and aspiring to. So this is about learning, refining. So somebody who is displaying the higher purpose of competition is not about obliterating others. It's about striving again to be the best that you can be by learning from others who are doing what you're doing better than yourself. And so that's the purpose. But the interesting thing for you is that you were born with Venus very close to the sun.
Was that?
And this is, yes. And Venus is much more about collaboration.
Can you hold one second? I'm going to call Carolyn. I'd like her to hear this. The Venus bit.
Okay, so when you were born with Venus very close to the sun. And because Venus is close to the sun, it acts as a modifier for that Aries energy, as we've been describing it. And one of the modifications would be that it has more of an urge to collaborate. So this, I would call it distaste that you are describing for competition, I would put down to the Venus influence, which would soften the Aries.
I accept that.
There you go. So there's the explanation for this diversion from the Aries energy that we've been discussing. And there's a bigger emphasis then on getting along. And as you were describing how your father and your brother would get very hot under the collar, shall we say, when they were debating. arguing.
Debating.
Arguing, trust me.
and that you were able to remain a little bit cooler about it. That would be the Venus conjunction. Did you ever feel the need to kind of intervene to patch things between them?
No, the more they fought, the better I liked it.
Well, see, that's very much more Aries than the Venus. Yeah,
That's not exactly choosing love, like he's.
I became a peacemaker later on. In those days, you've got to remember, I was the dunce. I was bottom of the class all the time. I was a dunce. So both of them looked down on me with a fair amount of cynicism and scorn. And so when they got beaten in arguments of their own choosing, that was very challenging and threatening for them.
Yeah. So, well, then,
I'm giving her a hard time.
I wouldn't say that. So there are two things that we talked about. We haven't talked about yet, but that you've kind of mentioned. And the first was that you've just talked about being seen as a dunce. So I was looking at where Mercury is in your chart, because Mercury is linked with the way that we think and the way that we articulate. Okay. And in Taurus, Taurus takes its time. It doesn't want to be rushed on anything. And for people who are in a hurry and who are more impulsive in their speech, and this can appear to be very slow. And when you were born, you also had Mercury very close to the planet Uranus, which means that there's a different way of thinking. So Taurus normally is quite plodding, and it's linear thinker. But with Uranus, it becomes a lateral thinker. And it becomes much more, other people would see it as erratic, but I think for the Uranus Mercury person, it's much more about making connections and seeing things that other people wouldn't see. So it's stepping right out of that linear Taurus way of thinking and into a I don't want to say bigger, but eclectic way of making connections, eclectic way of seeing things. And that people can appear quite odd or disturbing, which may be one of the reasons why your brother and your father saw you as being, well, as you put it, a dunce.
I can definitely relate to what you're saying. You know, I realized long ago that my way of thinking is not the common way of thinking. I think along different levels, and I would have described it more holistic.
Yes, you would, absolutely. And I would tend to agree with that. It's just that would not necessarily be the norm in terms of interpreting what you're seeing, describing. I think the other thing is that you can get insights in a flash. So it's the connection of the seer. Everything's just come in a flash. You could be doing something completely mundane, and suddenly there's a flash of inspiration which comes in, and
everything connects.
Yeah, and you see it, and it's so clear. But then you have to use the Venus energy to make it palatable for everybody else, and that's Aries isn't always interested in doing, particularly when you have that Uranus Mercury connection, which
this is horrible, isn't it?
Which can be quite uncompromised in the way that you come across.
I used to be completely impatient with sharing anything, but gradually, when I started 30 years ago on the traveling the world, I gradually learned to communicate what I wanted to say, and to not, to let go of all reactions. And gradually I began to realize probably nobody fully understands what I'm saying. And so I would say to them, don't go at this with your intellect, feel it with your heart. And then I began to get much better results.
Yes, yes, exactly. So one of the saving graces in all of this is that you have the moon in Gemini. So, when you were talking about being articulate, that would be why, because the moon in Gemini, well, it's a chatterbox. This is the chatterbox child. And always
Sorry.
wondering, yeah, no.
When I was a child, somebody told me I'd been vaccinated with a gramophone needle.
He still's a good little talker. He likes to present, whether it's to 1 or 100, it doesn't matter. He likes to.
So, and that's it. That is, very much a Gemini trait. It is the Gemini trait, is to communicate, to think and to communicate. And I think in order to be articulate, you have to be able to be cool. And you talked about being able to be cool when you were debating, shall we, using a euphemism, arguing with your brother and your father. And so I think when we think about what it takes to be cool, it takes the ability to be objective, and it takes the ability to step outside of feelings. So the moon in Gemini does that. It does that very well, because what it does is it takes feeling and then it rationalizes feeling. So that's obviously going to be a double-edged sword, because it means that you can disconnect from your feelings and use it. You don't even know it. It's an instinctive thing that you're doing, where you're stepping away from your feelings and detaching in order to rationalize. The danger with that would be that, being an Aries, it can create a volcanic situation, particularly as I see that the sun is in a square with Pluto and Jupiter, which is, it indicates a tension there. And if you detach from your feelings too much, there's an explosion coming. And my goodness, that would be pretty devastating, I think.
They've finished, that's long finished, but that used to happen on occasions. But and I used what you said, I did it that way, but since in my 50s, I'm far more non-attached. I'm not attached to how people receive me. I don't have to it's not a process, it's just, I'm not really attached. If I say something, I don't believe it. Well, I'm fine with that. I don't really care whether they believe me or not. I'm just not attached to what they think. I'm rather more attached to what I think about me than what they think about me.
But he is very sensitive, though. And sometimes I wonder if,
I used to be far too sensitive.
Yeah.
That's gone.
Yeah, he has.
But you see, the silly side part is I'm basically a shy person. I had to put that aside as a public figure.
Of course. I think what you said there, which I think is really very telling, is that you learned non-attachment. And again, that is the upside of the moon in Gemini, is that it makes it easier for you to, and when we're talking about non-attachment, we're talking in the sense of the Buddhist principle of non-attachment, rather than it being about you detaching from your own feelings, which is a less healthy approach, and which is what was leading to the occasional eruption. So the sensitivity that Carolyn had just highlighted, when you were born again, and now we're coming to the more mystical side of your chart, because when you were born, the moon was in a square with Neptune. And so Neptune is about a desire for oneness. Now, I could talk about harmony, I could talk about unity, but it's not that. It's oneness. It's an understanding that everything is connected, and that, so it's a very numinous energy. And I think that for you, with that moon square to Neptune, the yearning was always there to not have the boundaries, the barriers that stop us from connecting with something bigger than ourselves. And I think that will have evolved through time as you discovered this within you and began to understand it better. And I'm just thinking in particular about your connection with nature and how you describe it. So does that make sense, Michael?
Oh yes, because I learned long ago that everybody lives within the borders and boundaries of their emotions and their beliefs, their mental and emotional boundaries. And in my early journeying into nature, I had to push those borders aside. And over the years, I pushed them back so far, they're a long way away. I have found an emotional boundary, but most people would never arrive there. It's a lonely place.
And yet it's a very rich place, because what you're talking about is the ability to connect with an energy that is beyond the physical.
Oh, way beyond.
Yeah. So that's rather lovely. You also have Mars in Sagittarius, and I know that you started your life here in the UK, but of course you're now in Australia, and you spend a lot of time traveling, teaching. So that's your Mars in Sagittarius, because Sagittarius is about the traveler, but it's also about spirituality and conviction. And Mars is about where we put our energy. So this is where you put your energy. You put your energy into traveling to teach about what you've learned, share what you've learned about spirituality. And of course, there is the true conviction of belief that goes with Sagittarius, which is needed in order to be a good teacher. A good teacher needs to have conviction. So
absolutely. I don't like the travel part though. I like being there and doing what I do, but traveling, especially in airports, and don't like it.
No, it's
I tolerate it.
Yes, you do. But when we talk about travel, we don't talk about the actual, what I mean is not necessarily
I know
that
what you mean.
The logistical bit. It's the enjoyment of experiencing new places, new cultures, and connecting with different people. That's the joy.
The real joy of travel is metaphysical travel. Body stays at home, sitting, relaxing, and the metaphysical self moves off anywhere I want to be, anywhere or any when.
That is a combination of the Sagittarius we talked about, as well as the Neptune energy that we talked about. So
she's got me all packaged.
But it's the freedom as well, because Sagittarius really is about freedom, and there's nothing more important. And I think for you to have that freedom, even when it's not physical, when it's within yourself, to move, I think is very valuable.
So when they say, like, for instance, my Aries is my sun, so what is my rising sign? People say your rising sign.
Time of birth for that. So the rising,
So the rising
sign is
calculated.
I don't know. Yeah, through the time of birth, which is why we haven't talked about it, because you haven't got
Right,
your.
okay, I get it.
So what that refers to is the constellation that's rising at the time that you were born. And the reason it's important, quite aside from what it signifies in its own right, is because it also sets another layer of the chart, which involves the houses. And we can't talk about that because that layer is missing, as we don't have a time of birth.
Is there any way to find that?
Well, I could be cheeky and say you could ask your spirit guides. That would be the shortcut.
Well, if I was to ask Inna, the answer that comes is 5 o'clock in the morning.
Ah, okay. Well, you know what? Sometime after we finish this, I'll look that up for you. Yeah. So we'll look that up and see. So yeah, but
That's my intuitive every time I think about this, it always comes up about 5 o'clock in the morning.
I will look it up. The less cheeky answer, the technical answer, which I should give, is that there is a process of rectification, which is fairly complex, that we would have to go through, looking at various events and cataloging them and see whether we could find the time of birth in that way. Not my favorite way to do things, but we'll.
No, by the time you got there, I'd be dead anyway.
we certainly could have a look at your intuition and see what that brings. So now you are busy at the moment doing lots of online things, Michael. Would you tell us a little bit about your online courses that you're doing?
Oh, absolutely. We're doing I've never done online things before, but actually I'm finding I enjoy it. And we're doing on the Great Awakening, which is a 9-week online course. And so we do a Tuesday and a Thursday evening, 1 week. Then the second week, next week, we do a Tuesday and Thursday evening, followed by an inner exercise, which is a metaphysical opportunity to experience what I've been talking about. And so it's like a process of taking a person through a deeper relationship with life. You know, people drift through life, and I'm not quite sure where astrology comes into this, but most people live a complete illusion from beginning to end. And that's not, I don't say that in a derogatory or critical way. I was certainly, in my life, was deeply an illusion for quite a long time. But eventually, where you focus, your energy flows and connects. And, you know, my focus moved toward, when I was 35, who am I? And so in discovering who you are and then moving with that, it eventually consumes your life, because truth is far more attractive than the most beautiful woman. Or at least it is at my age now. I'm not sure I'd have said that as a teenager. But anyway, truth has an enormous spiritual attraction. And so the idea of this, the Great Awakening, is because right now in humanity, there is an awakening taking place. People are beginning to realize that maybe for thousands of years, we've been manipulated and maneuvered to an incredible degree, far more than most people realize. And there is we're at the end of a 200,000 year cycle, and the age of Aquarius is already beginning. And so they're merging. There is a rising in frequency, and that began 2012. It really stepped up. So there's a rising frequency, and yet the controllers, the cabal, are creating a fear, of global fear in humanity, which is a lowering of the frequency. So they're clashing, they're colliding, and that's creating enormous conflict in humanity and great fear. And so I'm not centering it entirely on that, but the idea of the Great Awakening online course is to see the truth which is actually taking place, and then to plot your own life from there to choose your direction. Because in every moment of your life, you are creating the content and direction of every moment of your life. Well, over 90% of humanity don't know that. They don't know they're creating their life. And so it's like flotsam on the ocean. And
that, you were saying you don't know where astrology fits in, where that's exactly what astrology is about. It's about awakening to who you really are, what is in there, and how to rise above and the limitations that you have imposed on yourself through your beliefs, and be free from that. So that is the higher purpose of astrology. So I think this sounds like a wonderful course. How can people find you?
how do people find me?
Michael Rhodes online, michaelrhodes.online. And that's all about the course, or michaelrhodes.com is his website.
Yeah, that's the way most people find you these days, online and websites. So
And Facebook, he's on Facebook, and MeWe.
I'm on Facebook and MeWe and some of those, but Facebook I have a regular column called Michael's Musings, and a lot of people read them.
Yes, and what I will do is I will put links to all of this on the notes accompanying this interview. And I would like also to say that you can find out more about Michael's work on our podcast, In the Light. And I will be putting a link to that as well here. So thank you very much, Michael, for...
Before you go, I would like to say something. If your spirituality and your truth is a boat on the ocean, and your astrology is the sails, so you can take a direction. How's that?
I love that. That is beautiful. Thank you. So that's a perfect way to end.
Thank you, Anna. We've had a lot of emails, and now I can see you face to face, so it's nice to connect with you.